Hi, welcome to the first Mindset for China Business webinar. This is the first in a series, so I'm going to do a quick introduction. So my name is Gene Xu, and I basically developed my entire career around helping first myself and then helping others understand how to navigate the complexities of doing business in China. And I've developed a lot of training tools and coaching methodologies that I'm going to share with all of you today. And it really helps, it helps you improve the perception of others and helps you achieve better outcomes when you go to China, okay? So today's agenda, what we're going to do is we're going to start with awareness, which means we have to first examine what is our own self-awareness. What do we understand about doing business in China? The second thing we're going to discuss is we're going to discuss a concept called cross-cultural performance. And this is basically how you train and develop yourself to succeed in a multicultural environment. And for Americans or Westerners doing business in China, this is especially difficult, and cross-cultural performance mastery is what I help executives to develop. The third is we're going to talk a little bit about China Business 101. Since this is the introductory webinar, we're just going to talk about very basic doing business in China. And then over the course of the next webinars, we'll get into specifics about communications, negotiations, partnering, and all different types of common engagements that you encounter in China. And at the end, we'll do a Q&A. Okay, so when you first think about doing business in a multicultural environment, and if you're a foreigner doing business in China, I always begin by asking about your awareness. So what are your current experiences in China? And what are your current perceptions of doing business in China? And the reason this is important is because your experiences and your perceptions could cause biases that you're not aware of that could affect how you decide or how you choose to conduct yourself. So the next question that you always want to ask yourself is how important you think cultural awareness is to doing business in China, and how important you think self-awareness is. And we're going to talk a lot about self-awareness and cultural awareness throughout all of these webinars. What factors can you manage and control to affect the outcomes that you are hoping to achieve? And are there things that you don't know? Okay, so these are unknown unknowns. When you go to a foreign country or a foreign culture, there are always things that you don't know. And that's why a lot of foreigners commit a lot of mistakes that really hurt their reputation in business in Asia. Okay, so somebody just came in. Okay, so we were talking about awareness. This is basically self-awareness. And the last thing we talked about is what are the things that you don't know when you're doing business in a multicultural environment. So as we discussed, cross-cultural performance is really the foundation for everything that you're going to do and how you're going to succeed, not only in China, but in any cross-cultural environment. So let me first talk about, okay, so people are coming in. So I always have to, right now I don't have a moderator, so I have to admit people. We're talking about cross-cultural performance as the foundation of everything that we're going to do in a multicultural environment. And this is especially important when Americans or Westerners attempt to do business in China. So let's go briefly, what is cross-cultural performance and what does it mean? So it means that, first of all, you believe that perceptions of other people are the gateways to achieving the outcomes that you desire. To achieve a win-win, first of all, you have to really manage how other people perceive you, okay? And then cross-cultural performance is also about the fact that perceptions of other people can actually be influenced by levers or factors that are 100% within your control. So as we establish the foundation, which is what we call cultural performance for doing business in China, we're really going to talk about managing the perception of other people. The other aspect of cross-cultural performance is your own misperceptions can be the number one cause of lost revenue, wasted expenditures, but most importantly, a negative reputation for yourself and your business. So cross-cultural performance is really managing how other people perceive you, but also reducing your own misperceptions of what is happening in the foreign market or with people that don't share the same culture and the same values that you do. Okay, so cross-cultural performance is really about things that we can actually control, and we call these things that you can adjust. And it's actually pretty simple. The things that you can adjust to influence the perception of other people is basically your own attitude, your mindset, and your approach. And throughout the course of these 9 webinars, we're going to always go back to what is your attitude, what is your mindset, what is your approach, and how does that affect how other people are actually perceiving you. And we're going to use the term AMA values when we talk about your attitude, mindset, and approach. Now, in order to know what adjustments you make to improve the perception of others, what is the right attitude? What is the healthy mindset? What approach should I use when I'm in a culture and an environment as complex as China? It really comes down to what we call the essential soft skills that matter. Okay, so you actually have to develop these essential soft skills in order to know what adjustments you even have to make. So what are these essential soft skills? First, it's really about self-awareness. Okay, awareness of yourself gives you insights in how you are perceived by other people. There is cultural awareness, which gives you insight into the microenvironment of other people. Okay, this is especially important when you do business in China. And then there's situational awareness. This gives you insights into the macro environment. And basically, it's talking about the context of the engagement that you're involved with. And the final soft skill is actually empathy. And developing empathy gives you the insights into what other people feel and what other people value. So when you have the essential soft skills that matter, you basically are able to make the proper or the healthy adjustments to your attitude, mindset, and approach, which will affect how other people perceive you, whether you're leading local employees, negotiating with partners or suppliers, or even interacting with government officials. How you are perceived is the key to achieving more successful outcomes. So developing soft skills, developing awareness, developing empathy is always tricky, because awareness and empathy really isn't something that anyone can teach you, and you can't really learn it from reading a book. So, but we all have the tools to develop soft skills. So I'm going to go over a little bit about how you can practice in order to develop these essential soft skills. Okay, one is imagination. That's positive. Okay, so everybody has imagination, and imagination is what you use to really understand why other people behave the way they behave. And it's thinking things in a very practical sense, as opposed to a very judgmental sense. So it's important that you imagine why people say the things they say and behave the way they behave without any kind of bias or prejudice. And the second tool is curiosity, okay? But curiosity has to have purpose. So you have to, purpose-driven curiosity means you're curious why people say the things they say and react the way they react before you judge them or react emotionally yourself. So if you really think about it, curiosity is actually the opposite of being judgmental towards someone. Okay, so the essential soft skills that matter if you really want to think about it, this is the key. Okay, it's starting with an awareness of yourself and how you're perceived by others, and then understanding the situation or the context, what are the cultural differences, and then how do other people feel and what do other people value. These are what we're going to call throughout this series of webinars, the essential soft skills that matter. And this really is feeding into the framework that I've developed for the concept of cross-cultural performance, which is the foundation of how you're going to actually achieve better outcomes in China. So when we talk about the first thing is how do we influence perceptions? So we have to understand how do we develop ourselves as people. So most people by default learn. They try to learn. They try to read books. They try to watch influencers in their YouTube videos, and they try to acquire knowledge, thinking that the knowledge that they have will somehow translate into greater success or higher performance. In our view, this is kind of misleading because the things that you learn really have almost no effect on how other people perceive you. Okay, so that's why we get into developing the things that we have to develop. So the things that we have to develop are basically the essential soft skills that matter: awareness and empathy. Okay, but even if you have awareness and you have empathy, none of that ultimately even makes much of a difference because it's all about the things that you adjust, your AMA values, your attitude, your mindset, and your approach. This is what other people perceive. Okay, if you have a very negative attitude or a condescending attitude or a righteous and judgmental attitude, and your mindset and your approach reflect that attitude, then people are going to perceive you in a very negative way. And in China, that's especially dangerous because you will really never know how they perceive you because of the culture of giving face, which means you will really rarely know what Chinese people really think of you. And that's what leads to all of the unexpected disappointments or China leadership dilemmas that we talk about later in the course. Okay? So the things that you adjust, your attitude, your mindset, and approach, this is what ultimately leads to the outcomes that you want to achieve. And these things are 100% controllable. And if you can see the arrow that connects things that you develop, awareness and empathy, these essential soft skills, this is actually what enables you to make the proper adjustments in order to create more positive perceptions. Okay, so that's a very quick introduction. And for the people who are online, we're actually going to do Q&A afterwards. So I'm going to go through the entire kind of presentation portion, and then we'll get into what your specific questions are. So you're all here because you want to learn how to crush it in China. So in this first webinar, we're really just going to go into the very basics, what I call China Business 101. Okay, and if you've done business in China or you worked in China or you're getting ready to work in China, you've probably heard this term, Guanxi. So Guanxi is really the key to all business relationships and personal relationships that you will develop with people in China. Okay, so it's important to understand how is Chinese Guanxi different than what we experience in other cultures, because in every culture we have to develop relationships. But what are the nuances and what are the differences? And why do people always talk about Guanxi relationships when it comes to doing China? Okay, so what is Guanxi? So Guanxi actually means the connection that you have with other people, and it's very similar to any business or personal relationship you have in any culture. Now, the Chinese cultural system of Guanxi is based on a system of reciprocity. Okay, and this is where it deviates from the way relationships are formed in other cultures, because it really involves the giving and receiving of face or mians. So you've probably heard this term before, especially if you live and work in China, you've heard this term before, but the question that you have to answer is, how do I give and receive face in order to develop closer Guanxi relationships? So there's a lot of things that you really have to understand about Chinese reciprocity in the giving and receiving of face. The first thing is, it's a mindset. So we're getting into the mindset and the attitude now. Do not assume Chinese reciprocity is corrupt. Okay, so that's an assumption that a lot of foreigners make, and that is, I'm not going to say it's the wrong assumption, but it's a really unhealthy assumption if you want to develop good Guanxi relationships. Okay, so the reality of what happens in China is, between Chinese people, giving money is associated with giving face. So you hear a lot about the red packets. Now they don't even do it now red packets are all digital. So everything is done by WeChat. You can give red packets by WeChat, but giving money is associated with giving face, which is how Chinese people amongst themselves develop Guanxi relationships. A lot of people in the West, especially Americans, assume that giving money, especially in business, is somehow related to corruption. But they don't really understand that this is just really deeply embedded into Chinese culture. Now, given how China has evolved over the last 5 years, the last 10 years, the last 20 years, Guanxi relationships between a Chinese and an American or a Westerner, the giving and receiving of money is actually not expected. Okay, but the giving and receiving of face is expected. Okay, so giving face, by definition, could be thought of as something that's actually disingenuous, because giving face basically means praising someone that you don't think deserves praise, and agreeing with someone or complimenting someone when you actually don't think that highly of them. So a lot of times foreigners will think people are just very disingenuous in China, but giving face is cultural. It's not disingenuous. So the advice that I would give any foreigner or any American doing business in China is, first of all, don't assume that Chinese people say what they mean or mean what they say. Okay. Now, I'm not saying this in a bad way, but for you to make a business decision, you can't interpret Chinese people literally. Okay. Now, as far as your attitude and mindset adjustment, also do not assume that anyone is purposefully deceitful or lying. I encounter this a lot when I'm coaching Westerners in China, is they will say that Chinese people are actually liars, but that is actually the wrong assumption. It's really that the Americans or the foreigners, they don't understand the Chinese concept of giving face, and they think saying something while giving face when it's not literally true is a lie. And that's just a very, very unhealthy way to think about all this. Okay. So over time, how do you know whether you've developed real Guanxi relationships or not? So for any foreigner going to China for the first time, and for those of you who have been in China for a period of time, you always have to understand or be aware that there's always a honeymoon period for foreigners when they go to China. So this honeymoon period can last anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And it basically means that your orbit, the people that are around you, will always be telling you what they think you want to hear. They're going to be praising you, and they're going to be giving you credit for success that you haven't even achieved yet. Okay, so this is the honeymoon period. And the advice to Westerners is don't be deceived by how well you think you are performing during the honeymoon period, because basically everybody is trying to tell you what you want to hear. Okay? Now, when you have started to develop real Guanxi relations, especially if you're there not permanently, but you're traveling there, you're meeting with suppliers, you're meeting with customers. What happens over time is there's less eating and drinking, and you will start to become aware of more honest conversations. Okay, this is something that you have to start developing empathy and an awareness of, where you communicate with people and you can start to sense that they're being more honest. And that is when they trust you more. And that is when you know that the relationship has gone from a very superficial Guanxi relationship to a very productive and genuine Guanxi relationship where you can actually collaborate and solve real problems when it comes to doing business in China. Okay, so just to give you a little idea, how I've created my success, whether it's as an entrepreneur or as an expat myself, or even as a consultant leading projects in China at Chinese state-owned enterprises. What are my AMA values? What is my attitude, mindset, and approach? So the first thing is I always consider myself equal and not above anyone in China. And this goes all the way down to the driver of my car, to the baoan, who is just kind of like the security guard in the offices that we work. This is basically how I don't know if it's natural or if I adjusted my attitude this way, but I never consider myself above anybody. So what happens is the people that are around my orbit, they can see me having very sincere, authentic conversations with everybody that is around me. Okay, that's a great attitude to have. I also have a natural curiosity, which helps me with my empathy. It helps me be empathetic to the needs of the Chinese people who report to me, or the people that I'm partnering with, or the people that I'm working with, or even my customers. Okay, this natural curiosity really is one of the tools to develop the essential soft skills that matter. I think I have that curiosity, and it's helped me a lot. And the final thing is, of course, to never be judgmental, which means you always have to assume that nothing is absolutely right or absolutely wrong. Okay? You always have to make that assumption. I have to, unfortunately, stop this slide to let somebody else into the meeting. Okay? And we're basically just wrapping up the formal portion of this where I'm talking about my own AMA values. Okay, so when you're doing business in China, China Business 101 is really about understanding Chinese reciprocity, the Chinese system of giving and receiving face, and how to develop real Guanxi relationships in China. Okay, so this all comes down to something that I call the Guanxi engine. And you really have to understand that this is the engine that runs everything that you're going to do in China. Okay, and this is related to a lot of the things that we talked about. It's related to the giving and receiving of faith. It's related to understanding and being empathetic to Chinese values. And ultimately, it relates to, are you able to develop real Guanxi relationships and create that real trust between individuals? And through the course of these 8 webinars, as we get into different aspects or different common engagements for you doing business in China, we'll relate to these to a lot of Chinese cultural concepts. We're not going to go through any of these now, but it really comes down to understanding Chinese values, understanding Chinese culture, developing the essential soft skills that matter, making healthy adjustments to your attitude, mindset, and approach, improving the perceptions of every person in your orbit, and believing that positive perceptions from the people around you, how you negotiate, how you communicate, how you lead, will ultimately lead to a win-win situation or the outcomes that you want to achieve. Okay? So again, some people came in late. I don't have a moderator, so I actually had to stop the presentation to let other people in. We're going to solve that issue by the next webinar where I will have somebody else moderate these meetings. This initial webinar is being recorded, so everything that you missed will be posted online where we talk about awareness, we talk about cross-cultural performance, and then we really get into what is China Business 101. Okay, so I'm going to, in the formal presentation now, I'm going to stop the share screen. And I'm going to unmute everybody. Okay, so everybody's unmuted. So you can unmute yourselves, and now you can ask questions or make comments and basically talk about anything that you want. So Jonathan, you're the only one who's unmuted now. Can I hear you?
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. So welcome to the webinar. You came in late, so you missed some of the beginning, but like I said, it's going to be recorded. No, that's fine. It's going to be, this whole session is recorded, so the formal portion you're going to be able to go back and watch. Tell me a little bit about your China experience and why are you even here listening to this webinar?
Okay, well, it was actually quite a coincidence because I was here for an exhibition at CBME, and I was just here about 2 days ago, and I decided that I want to make the best use of my time while I'm here in Shanghai, and I actually just started my my digital marketing company, and I like to understand more about Chinese culture, and that's why I'm trying to look up for like any kinds of interest group that are into trying to get a bunch of people to get together to understand more about Chinese culture, trying to expand, trying to just help each other grow in the business company.
You definitely came to the right place. I definitely encourage you to look at the beginning, because what we get into is we really get into, before we really get into specifics about the common engagements that you're going to encounter in China, like communications, negotiations. I mean, you've seen the list of all the courses that we're going to do. Today was really about foundational self-skills, establishing the foundation, developing the right framework to improve how you interact, not just with people in China, but with people anywhere. Now, based on your accent, are you from Singapore or Malaysia?
Singapore.
Singapore, okay. So
yeah.
So Singapore obviously is very different than China. And even though there's a lot of Singaporeans that speak Mandarin, there's a lot of overseas Chinese in Singapore that are from a Chinese background. Like when I do business in Singapore, I'm speaking Mandarin Chinese, 70 to 80% of the time.
Okay? Yes.
But that doesn't mean that Singaporeans share the same set of values as people in mainland China. So I just wanted to welcome you to this series of webinars. This is just the first one. Over the course of the next 3 months, every other week, we're going to do one of these. And every other week, we're going to talk about one specific engagement. And what are the cultural implications of how Chinese people think and how they behave. Now, how often do you travel to China?
Well, I would say I'm actually not pretty sure because this was quite an impromptu ones that my boss sent me over.
Is this your first trip to China?
Yes, this is my first trip.
Okay.
And I only decided on this trip about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so you may or may not frequently come to China.
Yes, that's right. But I'm actually interested in China. I'm actually it piques my interest. So I like to know, because it's quite different the way they do business. So the more I want to know more about China.
Okay, well that's great. So you missed the introduction. So my background basically is I'm an American, but I've been working in Asia and China for over 20 years, and I speak fluent Mandarin Chinese. So over the last 3 to 4 years, I've started I started my own business. So now what I do is I do what they call cross-cultural performance training, coaching, and consulting. And now that I'm back in the United States, I really focus on helping Americans or helping foreigners understand how to navigate the complexities of doing business in China. And all of the materials that I'm developing, so you're going to have to go back and see it, but all of the materials that I'm developing, this is not something that I read from a book or learned from McKinsey or other consultants. These are all things that are developed based on my own practical experience, succeeding and failing in China, basically since in Asia since 1996 and in mainland China since 2004. So hopefully you guys will find this valuable. Now the other people, Danny, and do you guys want to jump in and ask any questions about, I mean, they were here for most of the seminar. Danny, if your microphone is not working, you can also type your question in chat, or Sitar, I'm not sure what name that is.
Caroline.
Caroline. Hi, Caroline.
Yeah.
I
Hi.
can't see you, but I can hear you.
I don't know where to start video.
Oh, there you are. So thank you for joining. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Shanghai, actually.
You're calling from Shanghai. And how long have you been in Shanghai?
1 week.
1 week. And how long will you stay in Shanghai?
At least 3 months, maybe longer.
Okay. And are you there for just kind of, your company sent you there for 3 months, kind of like a rotation, or why are you there?
Almost like I'm here for work. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a Norwegian company, but we have an office here in Shanghai.
Okay. And are you visiting China for the very first time this time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Going all in on the first one.
Okay. Well, so tell me what you thought about my approach to helping people become successful in China. You were here for most of the webinar. Do you have any questions? That's what we want to know.
I don't think I have anything else than questions from these last few days here. I don't know. I think it's interesting. I like your approach. I'm gonna keep on checking in on this webinar.
Okay. Well, that's great. So all of you who have registered, we will be sending out all of the information by email. So by registering, you get all of this is going to be created into PDFs. So you can use it as reference. You can share it with other people. If you have a VPN in China and you can access Facebook, we have a Facebook group, several Facebook groups where we talk about these issues. I also have a YouTube channel where I specifically go over different concepts, different key Chinese concepts. And I tell a story about why it's important, and actually how to navigate that if you're not familiar with Chinese culture. So your name is Caroline?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for attending. This is actually, I've been lecturing on a mindset for China business since 2006, but this is my first webinar. So we're still trying to work through some of the technical issues of actually doing a webinar. So I'm also learning. So I want to thank you guys for attending.
First of all, thank you for Jean for doing this. It's quite interesting. Well, maybe my first question would be, what's the most important elements when doing business in China? Maybe you could, I don't know, I'm just trying to shoot off a question here.
Yeah, well, so I think since you missed the beginning, I'm going to just kind of go over it again. When you go to China for the very first time, and this applies especially to Caroline, when you go to China and you're new and you're a foreigner, the first thing you have to do is you have to have a level of self-awareness. Okay, so Jonathan, you being a Singaporean and you being Asian, people are going to perceive you differently. Caroline being almost like a stereotypical Western attractive female, you're going to get a much different response from the people around you. Okay. The real key, well, so I'll just take the example of both of you separately. So Caroline, what you're going to experience is you're going to experience a lot of hospitality. Okay. People are going to be super nice. People are going to be very interested to show you around, take you out, introduce you to the different venues in Shanghai where can you go dancing, where can you go drinking, where can you do this, where can you do this. So that's great. Take advantage of those opportunities to develop relationships with local Chinese people. But then in the background, just be aware that you're in what we call the honeymoon period. So everything that you're experiencing is going to be very superficial, but don't judge it. That's just culturally what's going on. Okay. And of course, your own natural personality will also have a lot to do with how people interact with you. So I would love for you to just since you're going to be in China for 3 months, just start to be curious, start to use your imagination, and start to just make mental notes on what you think people are thinking when they talk to you and when they engage with you. And does that interaction change depending on how you react or how you respond? This is really, we call it a journey to become a master of cross-cultural performance. So this is really about you developing these essential soft skills and then applying those, not just when you're in China, but for the rest of your career. I've been doing this for 20 years and I continuously have to better understand how other people perceive me and how to be more empathetic to the different personality types and the different types of people that I have to interact with. That's so important if you aspire to get into higher levels of leadership and management. So for Jonathan, you just have to, it's almost the same thing, but you just have to be aware that Chinese people have a different perception of Singaporeans.
Oh, okay.
Some of it's positive, but some of it may not be positive. So you don't want to react negatively or emotionally when the perceptions are not positive. Now, one of the things that you have to be aware of is traditionally in China, you have to understand the trend in China. So the trend in China is 15 years ago. Everybody who was a middle-level manager and above was a foreigner. Okay. That trend has dramatically changed. Now, everybody who is a senior director and below is a local Chinese. Now, obviously, there are exceptions, but for foreign companies who operate in China, they are sending fewer and fewer expats, and they have to hire locals because locals have the ability to actually get things done in China, and locals now have anywhere from 10 to 15 years of multinational global experience. So you have this whole, especially if you're in Shanghai, you have this whole community of Chinese professionals that all have global experience, they all speak English. So foreigners now don't have a competitive advantage just by speaking English. They have to bring an additional value proposition to earn people's respect and to earn people's trust. And if you come in with technology leadership or a better understanding of the company that you're representing, all of that is great. One of the things, Jonathan, that you have to keep in mind is if you look at a lot of the foreign multinational companies, small to medium multinational companies, even large multinational companies, a lot of them, if you look at the history, they all have what they call a China CEO. Okay. And the reason that you may encounter cultural biases from Chinese people is because the Chinese CEOs that foreign multinational companies hire, they're either from Singapore, from Taiwan, or from Hong Kong. And so the mainland Chinese people who don't feel that they're inferior at all to Taiwanese, Hong Kongese, or Singaporeans, they will feel kind of like they feel like they have a chip on their shoulder that they have to prove themselves against Taiwanese, people from Hong Kong and people from Singapore. Now that's obviously not true across the board, but there are these cultural biases because what the Chinese have seen over the last 10 or 15 years is they've seen when foreign multinational companies want to hire a China head or a China CEO, that person is never from mainland China. That person is almost exclusively Taiwanese, Hong Kongese, or Singaporean. Sometimes from Malaysia. And the reason, of course, and when I talk to Chinese people, is I tell them not to judge that either, because people from Hong Kong, people from Singapore, people from Taiwan naturally have a culture and a value system that's more aligned with the Western multinational. So for Chinese people, I advise them that if you want to get into higher levels of leadership, if you want to break the glass ceiling and you're working for a multinational company, then you also have to make an adjustment to your attitude, mindset, and approach. So it works in both directions. When I was running my business in China, I didn't target foreigners. I targeted Chinese executives, Chinese white-collar professionals. I trained Chinese people to succeed outside of China or to succeed on a global stage. Okay. By the way, that's a great question. So Carolina, it's time to put you on the spot before we end this call. I'm going to really strongly request that you ask a question. Anything that you're curious about, your first time in Shanghai, about your upcoming experience.
I'd like to ask a question in words of what you just said. Because when you said people will treat me with great hospitality, do you mean like in an after work sense, or would it be the same in the business setting?
Well, it probably will be in an after work sense. But now, what is your level within the company? That when you go to China, are you going there as like a general manager, or are you going there as just somebody who is providing support?
Project manager.
Project manager. Okay. So okay. Yeah. Now, are you putting together a local team, or are you?
No, we have a team here, but I will be working with suppliers and some people from the office here. Yeah.
You'll be working directly with suppliers. And what is the goal of the project? What is the final deliverable?
It's product development, so it's developing something from an idea and then getting it into the market.
Okay. Are you working with local product development teams, or are you working with designers overseas?
Local.
Okay. So.
And some from our Norwegian office, of course.
Okay. So. First of all, congratulations. This is a really, really exciting project that you're undertaking. So one of the things that I assume that's going to be really important for you is you're developing products that are going to be localized for China. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So the most challenging aspect of your job in the short term will be really understanding what are the market requirements in China. Okay. There's going to be a lot of people giving you a lot of opinions and a lot of different things. And you're going to probably struggle with trying to please everybody because you can't please everybody. And the market realities, a lot of the things that you're going to receive, they're not going to be fact-based. So anytime you're leading a project, everything has to be data-driven or fact-based. What you have to do is you have to separate what is coming from fact-based analysis and what is coming just from people's opinions. Okay. Now that being said, never discount somebody's opinion, because actually the opinions, if you find somebody that you really trust and that you really work with, especially if you go out to like dinner after work and you really get to know them, they're going to give you really good insights on things that cannot be measured. Okay.
Yeah.
That is the complexity of doing business in China, because a lot of the realities of how consumers behave, even in whether it's B2B or B2C, is that a lot of the ways that the Chinese mentality and the Chinese mindset is it can't be measured. The evidence is colloquial. So that's why the relationships with the local people are so important. And then what you have to do is you have to develop the awareness to be able to make a judgment. How do I balance this feedback about what local customers want with what's practical, with what our company can develop, and what is data-driven? That's the biggest challenge of being a project manager, doing something that you're doing, is you're going to get a lot of different things, and finding the right balance is going to be your key to success.
Yeah. Very strong opinions here.
So again, I think what you're doing is going to be a great case study. I also do podcasts. It's called the China Leadership Dilemma Podcast. And what I do is I interview people who have had interesting experiences in China. And what we try to do is we try to explore the impactful nuances of culture across the deepest levels of awareness. That's the tagline. And since you are going to be in China for 3 months, hopefully you're going to attend these webinars over the next 2 months. At the end of our time together through these webinar series, I would love to interview you for my podcast.
Sure.
I'd love for you to be a guest on my podcast, and we'll talk about your experiences, and the podcast will be about you. It'll be everything that you learned, everything that you discovered, what was shocking, what did you realize in the first 2 weeks, what did you only realize 3 months later as you're getting ready to leave China. Is that a deal?
That's the deal, yeah.
And for everybody on the call, Danny, I think you're probably still muted, Jonathan, what I want to do is I want to engage with all of you. So I don't want to make it difficult where you actually have to go into the Facebook group and ask a question. You have my email address through the mailing list. If you have general questions, just email me. I will be happy to not only answer your questions, but talk about your questions during the Q&A at the webinar, so everybody can kind of learn from what we discussed.